Fully ready to start. Let me get the away. All right, cool. I'll probably just begin, to be honest. So, hi everybody. Most of you will know me already, but for those who don't, my name is Sean MacDonald. I'm a research associate here at the University of Glasgow. I completed my PhD last year. And this talk is basically going to be kind of going through the research I did with my PhD and kind of the learnings I had around my specific field of kind of effective haptics and the learnings I had higher level around effective research in general, and just kind of a fun path through some cool research and some cool findings. So we'll hopefully go to the next slide. So can I also make this a bit smaller? Hopefully. Go away. Goodbye. All right, cool. So yeah, so I'm going to be walking through kind of my research regarding emotionally resonant vibrations and their applicability as a calming social anxiety intervention. That's relatively close to my thesis title. We'll take a look at kind of my rationale, like why did I do this? Like why did I investigate both this topic and this potential solution? The contributions and the learnings, and like I said, the kind of the higher level takeaways. We're going to do a weird setup today. So I was planning on polishing this presentation this week before this talk, and what instead happened is I got really grimly ill the entire week. So what we have instead is half a slideshow and half a video that I made. This video was made for a paper that I presented, and SIGSA asked that in response for their funding my attendance to India, so a very exciting, expensive conference, they would make me make a video that summarized my PhD. That was a few £100s. And then my, what's it called? Visa got denied. So instead they spent £60 to spend me to attend an online conference, and I still made the video. So I really want to get the most value out of this video that I possibly can now. So we're squeezing another half presentation out of it here, but it has some, nice vector animations that I did during COVID lockdown, I seem to remember. So anyway, we're gonna go along to here, and I think we're gonna start here. So basically, this was the kind of the problem that I began with. So I have a personal connection to kind of social anxiety. My partner suffers from quite severe social anxiety. She doesn't leave the house very much. And we've all experienced social anxiety at some point in our lives to some degree. I'm experiencing a little bit of it right now. This is a classic public speaking task. But it's also just one of the world's most common mental health conditions. The primary mechanism for treating it is exposure therapy or some kind of social exposure. This, once again, is a fantastic example of social exposure. I am here socially exposed in front of all of you guys. And the idea is that you'll stand up, you'll face your fears, and then you'll work with a therapist or with some kind of program to challenge the negative perceptions that you have around what social anxiety and, are you being negatively judged or not? And then you'll work through to kind of slowly disprove your false inner assumptions. But the issue with this strategy is that social exposure is necessarily really scary and hard to do. It's a effective but not very well adhered to program of exposure. And so you often end up with people who will often start therapies and then just not do this step. And so they end up getting kind of stuck. And we wanted to basically look at, is there something that I can do that can make that actual act, not the signing up, which people often do, or the therapy bit, which people often do, but the actual standing up here or standing in front of somebody in a bar or at your house, whatever, doing that social exposure, can we make that part easier? And hopefully it's now playing. And what we wanted to investigate with that is, can we do something within that action, that social interaction space? And the issue with doing stuff within social interaction is that there's a bunch of stuff you can't do. So if you want to maintain good eye contact, hearing, speaking, and maybe you can't interrupt sight with like looking at a screen. You can't interrupt hearing by playing calming music or something. These are all things people need for conversation. You're actually quite limited in what you can be doing. So we wanted to investigate haptics as a possible way to intervene, because you could be either holding something or wearing something or feeling something that could play you a touch sensation without interrupting these core conversational faculties. And we wanted to investigate if you could do calming haptic sensations to kind of give people a calming and relaxing kind of vibe. So this kind of works in hospital settings, for example, with music. This is kind of established that you can play people calming stimuli or stimuli that evoke calming sensations and get a reduced anxiety or stress response. And we wanted to see if that could work in this context as well. The issue is that vibrations are really, really good at kind of making you feel alerted in the way that we normally use them in day-to-day life. So in day-to-day life, normally with vibrations, you know, you'll hear a buzz from your phone. If the buzz is small, then maybe you'll feel like it's a bit urgent. If the buzz is repeated, communicating that. But historically, its ability to translate positive or negative emotions has been quite limited. And we wanted to see if we could expand that. We want to expand that out by exploring kind of more evocative vibrations. So I'll give you a little bit of a kind of an idea about where I came into this project with inspiration-wise before I get into the emotionally resonant vibrations themselves. So this was my bachelor's project. It's called Tamu To Do, and it's a to-do list app that is meant to make you want to do your day-to-day tasks by giving you a cute Tamagotchi that smiles at you when you're doing well and looks a little bit sad if you've not like done the washing for like 4 days. People always ask, can Tamu die if you don't do your chores enough? This is not a thing. I would not program this into an app that's monstrous. I just wanted to continue to defend that point here and now. But it kind of shows I was interested in the idea of using positive emotion, like generating positive emotion in people that made them feel better about doing something or happier to engage in something. And then when I was considering this task and the idea of a haptic intervention in the really early days, I thought back to this. So this is a worry stone. Worry stones are basically just these lovely little smoothed out rocks that you'll hold in your hand, and you'll kind of rub a finger or a thumb into them and do this kind of self-soothing motion that feels nice, and it's kind of something to distract you. And this is something that I had when I was a kid for some reason. And I wondered, could you do a worry stone that kind of touches you back? You know, is that something that you could do? The other kind of inspiration I had was that, you know, if we're starting off here with standard phone vibration, which is alerting, not particularly pleasant, but it kind of gets the job done. And if we consider something that is custom designed and experimentally shown to have some calming effects, like a full-on social robot, for example, you know, it looks cute, it's got the whole package, it's fluffy, it's, you know, it's doing a lot of work, very not discreetly, to be a calming social presence. Like, how far along do we need to go from this to this before we start getting some of the kickback of this calming stuff over here? So I wanted to see where along here we could get to before we started getting something calming, because this is great, but you can't take this into a social situation really and expect not to have some kind of, at least a comment about it. And if you're socially anxious, it's going to make you feel quite self-conscious to kind of lug up with the power and be like, don't mind him, he's just, you know, my son. So with that in mind, we'll go a little bit into kind of the new kind of vibrotactile stimuli that we kind of developed to explore this. So I call them emotionally resonant vibrations. So basically, unlike abstract vibrations, these are vibrations that are meant to remind people of past experiences, evoke past experiences. This is meant to be making a cat purring noise, and it's not doing it on the video, but I think I'm going to play you one in a second. So basically, the vibration itself might not necessarily, to somebody who has no prior experience of any of the things evoke any real difference in emotion. But if you can feel the vibration and it feels like a cat purring and you have a positive association with cat purring, you might get a bit of emotional kickback. That was basically the idea that we wanted to explore doing that. I'm going to see how this runs on. So prior work has kind of explored emotionally resonant sound, like all robots, which are essentially resonant of entire animals. But we wanted to explore this with vibration. And I'm going to quickly hop over here to give a bit more details about that. So this is kind of the paper where we published exploring it, and this was in ICMI 2020. The way that these are generated is really simple. It's almost naive. Like, we just take a sound recording of the thing we want, do a little bit of processing to it so that it presents its bass frequencies better and its treble frequencies less for the vibrotactile actuator, and then just present it. I can actually kind of show you what that feels like just now. So here's like a raw cat purring sound. This is the one that we, for our processing, although we tried a couple of different things, is we landed on, it's going to stop, you can stop now. And this is it gone through some processing to really emphasize its bass tones. This means that it has less sound leakage to an actuator and it presents its bass tones more. It's just using some low pass filtering and some bass adjustment, normalizing volumes. So really, really simple generation. The nice thing about this is that for better or worse, we can confirm. Let's make sure this chat is okay. You guys, the sound is coming out of the speakers in the room, but I don't know that it's also coming out of Zoom. And I don't know if it is.
When you're sharing You need to share this system sound enabled.
I did press that, but then I changed the system sound, which is probably what's happened. It's the only sound we have in the presentation, so I'm sadly just going to leave it. But imagine cat purring, and then imagine cat purring that sounds kind of bass boosted, and you've basically got the gist. Because there's not too much more sound to be had, luckily. I'm going to drag this over here again. The nice thing about generating the stimuli this way is that there've been studies exploring how to design kind of custom vibrotactile cues or patterns that might represent real-world phenomena, but it takes a lot of validation to actually prove that these things represent this to most people, and then people then have to recognize those stimuli as those things separately to that. If you do it this way, then if people recognize them, then you at least have a system where you can say, okay, we can, to some degree, take real sound recordings and then have people recognize them as vibration. It might not work as well for some phenomena as others, but it means you don't have to go through that extra step of validating essentially crafted or made up stimuli. Also, people have not had much success with emulating real world phenomena with single actuators. They normally have to use patterns, like they'll use like a set of, like a 4 kind of dots on the back of your arm, 4 tactiles, and then they'll have them kind of vibrate at different points to feel like raindrops in your arm for something like this. But this is not very transferable. The nice thing about a single actuator is we all have it in our phone already, right? We all have it in a phone, we have it in tons of devices, and I really want to see if we could make something that's as flexible and pragmatic and easy to use as that and still convey these things. So let's go back to the video. This is the actuator that we use. This is a actuator Mark II. Rest in peace. These things are no longer made, unfortunately, but they're really, really good. We mounted it inside of this kind of rigid handrest so that people could rest their whole hand on it, and it would kind of fill their hand like this and radiate through. Because we don't know what kind of objects at this stage people are going to be holding them in. We just kind of wanted, it might be something they're holding in their hand, could be a phone, they might even be wearing it. We just wanted to give people this kind of this overall sense. And then we kind of mapped out kind of the comparative emotional ranges. So this red line here is what the kind of original set of abstract stimuli that we compared them to. So this was a set of abstract stimuli actually from Graham's work, and before that from Yu's work, which is like a series of stimuli varied by amplitude and by frequency. And so, some of them are faster, some of them are slower, and some of them are stronger, and some of them are weaker, but they're just kind of bass tones, And then this is our set. And they've managed to cover a somewhat bigger ground on this scale. To quickly explain this scale, if anyone doesn't know, this is the Russell circumplex model of affect. It basically charts emotion around these 2 axes. So arousal is kind of physical alertedness to not very much to lots. So this is kind of, if something barely catches your attention and it's not very stimulating, versus something that immediately grabs your attention is very, very stimulating. And then valence is kind of a pleasantness to unpleasantness scale. So this is pleasant, this is unpleasant. And you can kind of see different of our cues kind of mapped around here. Like, here's cat purring, which is kind of a little bit pleasant and a little bit physically arousing. And then you've got down here, you've got breathing down here, which was kind of not very pleasant because people thought this breathing kind of felt phlegmy and ill. But it did evoke breathing. People did recognize it as breathing. They just worried about the guy who was breathing. I think that's part of the idea of breathing through a deep, bassy vibrotactile actuator. But basically, we found that it was looking promising that it was charting a little bit of a wider, kind of wider ground, which is what we were looking for. I'm going to quickly hop over here. No, hush yourself. All right, there we go. And talk a little bit more about how we expected these vibrations to work in the context of social anxiety. So this is the cognitive model of social anxiety. This is Rappi's version. There's been a few different iterations, but I like this one because I kind of like the way it's laid out. So everybody has a mental representation of themselves when in social situations. If normally you don't even think about it, but if you screw up or say something silly and then you feel self-conscious, that's you realizing that you think you've done something foolish in a social situation. And the way this is kind of generated is that you perceive someone to be watching you, and then you perceive how you're doing versus what you think the audience cares about. For most people, most of the time, if these things aren't very far apart in their subconscious, they don't really think about it. But as soon as you say something that you think is significantly above or below the expectations of your audience, then you might start to feel this. And then you might start to think, okay, what is the consequence of this difference in expectation? And this can then result in a variety of different anxiety symptoms. It can result in behavioral symptoms. It can result in physical symptoms like the raised heart rate, raised breathing rate. And it can also result in cognitive symptoms and kind of thought patterns, you starting to worry, oh, I'm screwing up or I'm screwing up. And all of these symptoms feed back into making you think like you're stumbling over your words, then you might start to think you're performing worse socially. And it's kind of a vicious cycle where your anxiety cues make you think you're a worse social performer, which then makes your anxiety cues worse, which then continues to spiral down. So we wanted to intercept here, down here. So this is the point where you're having these cues, and it could be the point where you're now going to start either worrying that these cues are feeding back in to how you're performing, or you might start having these kind of increased physiological symptoms that might start literally impacting your action, your ability to kind of speak and interact happily and easily. We wanted to see if we could intervene here. So the idea is that either through a couple of different emotion regulation vectors, we could either look to kind of perform a bit of what we call one of the cognitive change, basically providing a alternative cognitive thought to the current negative thought cycle. In this case, it would be a cognitive thought of being reminded of some pleasant past memory, essentially, like a cat purring or a nice walk along the beach with some crashing waves or whatever. Or just literally just distracting your physiological attention, your attentional redeployment from those internal physical symptoms to something else, something that is not an immediate signal of, oh, I'm really, really anxious and stressed right now. Some people can often see this as kind of a grounding sensation as well. Like people will often perform grounding exercises inside of social situations. This is kind of a similar idea, just taking your mind off of focusing on your own physiological symptoms onto something else. I was always taught when I was young, count the amount of like door handles in the room, this kind of thing, just like something to get your mind or your attention onto something else. So I'm going to go back over here. So, well, this scoots along. We'll wait for it to get to here. Yes, as I said, we can see that we have a wider range of a wider overall emotional range, and it was better at reaching further into different kind of high valence responses, particularly. And at least one participant in each study was able to associate at least one vibration with one past emotional experience. I'm a cat lover, and I feel purring and I feel nice. Reminded me of my baby's heartbeat. People got reminded of crashing waves or of raindrops. But these are all pretty individualistic, and this is kind of the first kind of alarm bell, is that in a lot of prior effective haptic research, people have kind of identified kind of broader trends in how different maybe frequencies or different amplitudes had affected haptic response. I mean, we're kind of getting the impression immediately that by leveraging these stimuli that are so reliant on personal experience and then someone's emotional association with personal experience, like you might recognize a cat sound and not like cats, or you might love cats. So, or even if you recognize it, you might not have the same experience and the same kind of emotional kickback. We started to get this impression that, yeah, it's going to be difficult to find kind of consistent trends across, and instead it's going to become a much more kind of personally focused and kind of individualized kind of system if you want to actually use this as an intervention. We explored some other stuff to try and kind of expand out the scope. So one thing I was really interested in is whether or not adding temperature to emotionally resonant vibrations could kind of change them a little bit, change how they work. So obviously temperature already has known emotional touch qualities. Warmth generally can add a little bit of pleasantness to multimodal stimuli, and cool can sometimes detract. And there is also a just general social element to warmth. Social warmth is a kind of it's a hardwired instinctual thing to some degree. And I wanted to see not only would that like kind of widen the emotional range of our stimuli, but also, if you play a warm temperature with a stimuli that you would expect to be cold, like a rushing river, for example, does that make it more pleasant because it's warm and warm is nice, or does it make it weird because a warm river is kind of strange? And if I play a cold cat purring, how much worse is that than warm cat purring? How much more creepy, how much more strange? Heartbeat as well is another one. And we found a couple of trends that did persist across everybody that were strong enough to persist for everybody, particularly, yeah, the heartbeat was more resonant when it was warm than when it was cold. Cold heartbeats were described as creepy by several participants. And the small stream was more resonant when it was cold than when it was hot. But we also found outside of these trends, a lot of qualitative examples of people going, certain stimuli, like a lot of we had one that's a kind of a nice bubbling sensation, water bubbles, and people going, oh, when it's hot, I think it's dangerous and scary because it's like boiling water. And when it's cold, it's like a nice burbling stream. So like a lot of this kind of mental associations coming in. But because they're reliant, once again, on people, first of all, finding the stimuli evocative in the first place, which everyone has different kind of capacity for each vibration. Finding trends across was not super easy. We only found these. And kind of our general vibe after this whole kind of part of the study was that these were kind of cool and these were interesting effects, but they weren't necessarily strong enough or powerful enough to be worth integrating. I think the main issue that I worried about with including thermal cues beyond this was that, as I said before, the vibrotactile actuator is really small and easy to use. You can place it on any semi-rigid object and it will basically vibrate through it. It can be in your phone. Thermotactile actuators get a lot more complicated to use. You need to kind of have your hand on a thermal element to feel them. They're bulky. They often require heat sinks. They're a lot more energy intensive. They're just a lot harder to use in a lot of different objects. So because of that, we didn't end up carrying this forward. But it definitely was an interesting opportunity. And it was also the point in that study, which is in our ICMI 2021 paper, 22 paper, where we kind of use that to also try a wider variety of real world phenomena. In our first study, we tried 8, and it was very speculative at that point. It was kind of like, I have an idea. Will these things work? I don't really know. Let's just try it. This was after we'd actually kind of gotten some kind of ground evidence, and we started to try and fill out the set of stimuli with more options people might find resonant. And the way that we filled out that set is by kind of finally kind of taking the work back to the actual users. So we've kind of, up until the early point, just been looking at what we could do with these vibrations, how these vibrations evoke real world sensations. That's kind of cool. But we wanted to see if we could fully engage socially anxious users to try and get a kind of a, basically to make something for them, and to make something, and also because it's easy enough for me to try like a set of 8 stimuli that I think might be resonant in my head, but I wanted to kind of scope out what the overall kind of design space might be for these cues. So the first time we asked a couple of different surveys. The first survey, we were just trying to understand how people with social anxiety currently cope with social exposure. One is kind of a motivator, if their coping mechanisms are all not productive, if they're maladaptive, then that adds more motivation for us to intervene. But also, do they already use any emotional touch? Do they already find any emotional touch calming? And could we then help to emulate that emotional touch for them? So we found that, as we kind of expected, most people just avoid social situations, which is not very adaptive. And it kind of brings back to that point before about social exposure is just something that needs to be improved or at least helped with. And they do enjoy emotional touch and find it calming, but they don't feel they can use emotional touch in public because it adds one more thing to feel worried about being perceived as. They worry that they'll be seen as weird or strange or dependent if they use social touch. So this could be a way for us to, with these vibrations, provide calming emotional touch in a way that doesn't draw that kind of stigma. So that was kind of part of our motivation that helps to kind of drive us further down this direction. And then switch to the second study here. So then we wanted to understand more about what kind of cues we should actually be kind of providing for people. So we did a big survey where we asked people to imagine themselves in a bunch of different social situations. They could be either socially close, like an intimate but difficult conversation with a partner in your house, or a conversation with a friend at a cafe, public or private, or it could be socially not close, but either public or private. So for example, a job interview with 3 people interviewing you, or it could be in a bar with a bunch of unfamiliar people. And this one was more private, and this one's more public. You want to understand if these factors had any kind of impact on the kind of stimuli people might want to feel. But I think in reality, putting people inside of these kind of asking people to kind of imagine themselves in these different scenarios mainly biased them into just thinking about nice things they'd felt in those different scenarios. So, people really liked the idea of music in cafes and bars because that's a positive emotional kind of experience that they've had. Home was a bit more interpretive. People's homes are very different, and you could have a lot more control over what happens in your home. So we had a lot more people. People were talking a lot more about kind of the social touch at home, because you can have that, and it's not a public place where you can kind of get potentially judged or stigmatized. We've got a lot of interesting kind of preferences for texture across all these. Like, people were discussing about the different kinds of smooth or rough or fluffy textures that they like, and we use that later on. Interestingly was the job interview. So job interview, so there was this trend where we have these kind of natural sensations here. These are the kind of a lot of the things that we kind of talked about a little bit with the emotionally resonant vibrations, like rain and waves and these kind of nice, calming, natural sensations. And we kind of chose these because there's a lot of evidence of people playing like calming nature audio in hospitals and stuff, like to relax them. And we thought, well, that sounds good. And then across a lot of these, when we offered people, would you like any kind of calming touch or noise? People were like, no, I'd like stuff that fits. Music, please. I would like stuff that fits in the bar. I would like to be music or fidgeting with cups or beer mats. But I guess because a job interview has literally no pleasant stimuli you can possibly imagine, people defaulted to kind of a default idea of what pleasant stimuli is like. So they kind of went back to nature. There was a few suggestions for these kind of things. You can see here, natural, and these are the ones. But when given no choice of a diegetically pleasant sensation, people did default back to natural sensations, as well as kind of background noise and things like kind of binaural beats and just kind of general calming rhythms. And this kind of helped us to basically lay out a bunch of the different kind of possible stimuli that we could try, and actually informed the wider set of stimuli that we explored in the thermotactile study when we went up to 8 to 15. And then from that study, and then from these, we kind of moved into kind of the third phase, where we took these vibrations that we developed and took kind of some of the mandate and the motivation from socially anxious users, and we tried to kind of move it towards the next step. You can kind of see here discussing more about this. So there were suggestions for kind of warm sensations, which also helped to prompt some of our exploration of temperature as well. And as I said, yeah, we used it to kind of widen the pool. And we found that there is possibility here for people to want and experience calming touch in these situations, but we just don't really have a good vector for it. So we moved forward to try and see how we could provide that vector. So yeah, after we had kind of identified the emotionally resonant vibrations, we wanted to kind of understand how we could kind of convey them, because vibrations need to vibrate through something. You need to be holding something that's vibrating or wearing something that's vibrating. And we'd gotten all these interesting ideas from the surveys about people like different kinds of textures and different kinds of shapes that they were to hold, and they were fidgeting with different objects in the survey. We wanted to know what people would do if they had free kind of reign to design them themselves. So we brought a bunch of socially anxious participants in. We screened them using the SIAS. It's not super easy to fully screen for social anxiety. The SIAS has a soft boundary that the authors recommend for might be socially anxious, might have what used to be called social anxiety disorder. So it used to be called social phobia, and it's now called social anxiety disorder. So we just used the likely to have social anxiety screening boundary for this. We brought people in and we asked people to kind of make different comfort objects. And these were objects, we asked them to craft objects before we introduced the vibrations that they just thought would be calming and comforting to hold. And before that, we asked them a few different questions, like, what is your prior experience with social anxiety? Have you found any kinds of touch to be calming or helpful in the past? And then we kind of, asked them to see if they could build the materials, what they could build. This was kind of inspired a little bit by, should we go over here? It was kind of inspired a little bit by a study by Simon Ferrario called Anxiety and Autism Towards Digitized Personal Health. So in this study, they helped people to make these kind of wearable bracelets that they could track distress events on. But in order to make them actually want to use them and feel not kind of, once again, a bit embarrassed by them or kind of depressed by them, to feel like happy with them and to feel like they kind of have ownership over them, they provide them little kits of components, modular components, and they crafted their own bracelets that they felt more ownership with. And because they were dealing with people who were often likely to be using kind of physical stimulation and self-stimming, it also let them kind of choose their own kind of haptic experiences when they were kind of fiddling with them as well. So we wanted to do something like that, but we want to provide a wider set of more malleable tools rather than a modular set of components so that we could really let people go kind of wild and make whatever they wanted. So we got a really nice variety of stuff. So probably one of the most common form factors, you can kind of see it here, 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 a little bit here, is kind of round and covered in fluff, just kind of like a small animal. And people often tapped into that, saying this is like a small animal. You can see this quote here, I find touching very soft things from plushy things to be soothing. And it's a bit like a hamster I used to have that was a furry animal, and that helped to calm me down. So people kind of like the idea of kind of sheltering this kind of small fluffy thing in their hand. But there's a lot of other designs as well. A lot of people used kind of multi-textural stuff. So they would have an object that had like 2 or 3 textures that they could kind of choose between depending on what they wanted to experience to give them some variety. So here is like felt on one side, sandpaper on the other side. This is a bunch of different kind of Play-Doh elements that are kind of wrapped together in cling film, and then you can kind of squish them around to make the colors blend and be malleable together. This is kind of a soft pillow here, and these were designed to model specific objects that were meaningful to the person. So a model of a doll that they have, a flower, and this is the model of a pillow. Can't remember what this one is, and it's not super clear from the picture. It's on my notes, but it's a model of something, and it was and it was meaningful. This down here is like almost like it was meant to be worn as kind of like around your neck, and it's like a little kind of spinning top that you can kind of twizzle in your hands like this. And there were also some kind of people that wanted to go for kind of these designs which were more square and blocky. And then the other kind of big factor was these finger groove ones, so kind of like a tool grip. People want to be able to hold something in their hand that fit their hand like this, and they could give it like a good squeeze and like apply some pressure. Oh God. And this is the kind of thing people were building. So we'll see some more kind of examples being highlighted through here. So after people built them, now this line is disappeared. After people built them, we kind of asked them a bit about them, and then because the vibrotactile actuators are so flexible, you can just kind of jam them or whatever. We would just kind of stick them on or insert them into these objects and kind of turn them into ad hoc vibrotactile objects kind of on the spot. And this was really nice because people could kind of build these things and then try out all the different vibrations we had and kind of find a pairing that might fit or might match and then discuss them. And people did feel that the vibrations were an important part of the experience, although they actually felt that the objects were an even more important part. They liked all aspects, but they really liked having the kind of the multisensory holistic aspect of the comfort object. Based on these trends, we made 3 high fidelity objects for a final evaluation, which I'll show in just a moment. This is a paper that I'm really glad came out in time for this talk. I signed up for this talk 3 weeks ago, and this paper came out 2 days ago. This paper discusses this kind of participatory prototyping thing that we just did here, but it also discusses the evaluation that I'll go into just now. So once we kind of had these all these different prototypes, we boiled down a lot of the different kind of trends that we saw, people's preferences, into these 3 kind of slightly higher fidelity versions. They're not super high fidelity, but the issue with people making their prototypes in the studio and then in the lab and then using them is they did tend to fall apart mid-use. And we wanted to have something that was kind of stuff that was kind of delineated enough and also strong enough that we could test it in an actual between groups evaluation for a while. I brought in 2 today. I can pass around. This one decided to give up the ghost and die partially today of all days. But I can pass them around. So here's like the Happy Ball. It's just like fluff and stressful with fluff. They're all fairly lo-fi. There's the cube, which is like a few different textures. If you lose the sandpaper side, don't worry, it's all good. And they both had fitted slots for the actuator, so they would really resonate well through the objects. And then we presented these alongside between groups evaluations. We want to understand if in an actual social exposure situation, if you gave people these objects versus people who did not have them, would you find any actual difference? So participants were once again all socially anxious, and we had them do a 3-minute presentation of a topic of their choice to a researcher on Zoom. Normally, these 3-minute BATs or behavioral assessment tasks are done in person in front of an audience of 2 or more. But we were in heavy COVID times at this stage. It's very hard even to get all the Zoom stuff scheduled out, but my various co-researchers were very generous with their time. We did find that the Zoom task was effective in generating enough social anxiety for a significant difference in anxiety levels as measured by a few different metrics across a 3-minute talk, which is good information for future work as well, because not everybody has US-style budgeting for whole audiences to do live BATs in front of like classes of kind of, trapped psychology students who have to do it for their credits. So, and yeah, so we had kind of two groups. The treatment group were people that they customized their comfort it, they would choose one of the 3 form factors. Well, actually scroll back very slightly. They choose one of the 3 form factors, and they would choose one of the vibrations that we ended up with that were best performing. They'd talk a bit about that. They would try all the different options, and then they would hold that during the task. Because vibration tends to cause kind of a sensation deadening effect or adaptation over time, the vibration would be on for 10 seconds, and then it would fade out and would fade in after 10 seconds so that people's hands wouldn't just go numb with vibration throughout the whole task. So they would take that and they would hold that throughout the task. And then we measured anxiety in a few different ways. So we had some physiological measures. We had skin conductance or GSR or SCR, or I think there's like 2 other acronyms. We measured this on the wrist. It's best to measure this ideally for a full sensitivity on the hands or on the back of the neck. But we wanted to choose places that would not interfere with the holding of the object and also would not make people feel too socially conscious because it's already, and someone that's visible or someone that would make you feel awkward because they're already having a social exposure event and we would like them to just try to like minimize that. We found through a paper that the wrist is about 70% as sensitive as the hand on average. So it could be a good alternative for anyone else out there who's looking to do any skin conductance stuff and doesn't want to use the hand for whatever reason. We used the state anxiety inventory to measure kind of people's in the moment feelings of anxiety. We did that both before and then after the tasks, and also heart rate as well. And I think we're going to go across to here in a moment. We found kind of an interesting mix of results, but I think I'm going to go to my supplementary slides here, which do a bit of a better job. Yeah, so we found between our objective measures, so our physiological results, the skin conductance, the heart rate, we found significant differences between base and, after the task, between both groups, both people who did and didn't have the comfort objects, but we didn't find the difference between the 2. There was a small mean difference, but not enough significant effect. But we did find quite a massive difference in distribution of self-reported scores. So this is the STIA, the State Anxiety Inventory, and this is the base for the base for with no objects, the base for with objects. They're kind of similar, they're a bit different. But then for post-task, after having done the task, the base for the control condition, no object, kind of sits here, and the base for the treatment with the object is very, very spread out. You've got some people who at least self-indicated that they were felt much less anxious, and some people that self-indicated they were much more anxious. And it's kind of reflected a little bit in our qualitative results as well. So we got a real feeling that some people found it was just one more thing to stress them out and to make them feel like one more thing to pay attention to, one more thing to worry about, where they were already trying to keep their head in order. And other people found it was a lot more grounding, and it kind of provided them a little bit of, a little bit of, kind of our hypothesized intervention, I guess, that it would provide them with some kind of way to distract themselves, either attention-wise or distract their thought patterns. The overall feedback from both studies, this is particular charts from the second study, that evaluation, was really, really positive in terms of participant subjective feedback. Obviously, this is pretty subject to desirability and novelty bias because it's a new thing and they are also socially anxious participants, so they're even more subject to desirability bias than normal. But it's positive, which is it's still positive rather than not. People really liked their comfort objects. They felt that they were able to kind of combine these different kind of options together to suit their preferences. And they felt the vibration did make it a bit more effective. They felt a bit more connected to it as well. They did feel like the task caused them significant social anxiety, and they felt it could be useful in a future situation. So once again, kind of similar sentiments to before, people would choose the haptic ball, augment it with cat purring or heartbeat or something similar, and kind of make themselves a small, evocative kind of animal-like object. Other people just found it to be a good distraction, not necessarily emotionally resonant of something, but just something to kind of focus their attention onto. And some people who kind of engage in kind of calming interactions with their objects, squeezing it or petting it or passing it around. And this is all very positive. There were some concerns raised as well. Obviously, aforementioned, I already said that some people just found that the objects added one more thing to get stressed out about, one more thing to pay attention to, and it split their focus, made the task harder. And other people said that they kind of worried that people perceive them using it in social situations. These objects were not, as you can see, well, if you've held them, not massively subtle at this stage. They're brightly colored kind of prototypes. Maybe in the future, you'd ideally want to integrate them into like a phone or something like this. Although we did find when we offered people the phone case form factor in the prototyping that literally nobody used it. But I think when given the chance to craft something all your own, maybe people thought that was more fun, more interesting, more personal. And yeah, other people just said, you know, some people wanted to use their hands while they talk. And so holding something could be kind of impede them in that way. And this could kind of drive us more towards wearables. We didn't end up going towards wearables in this work, only because in our kind of prototyping, one person made a wearable that actually touches the skin, and the other person made a wearable that hangs on a necklace. So we didn't pursue that in this time, but it could be worth going back to, because it's possible that just people, given the prompts they were given and how we discussed it and how they were presented or how we talked about it in this task, just felt more drawn towards building holdables, although we did specify in this task that they could build holdables, wearables, whatever. Let's go over here and go over here. So this will probably just be recapping. I apologize for the video and the slides covering similar bits. Like I say, I did not unfortunately get the chance to drill it as much as I would like to, but hopefully the slides add a bit of extra kind of flavor. Yeah, overall, the results of the study were quite curious, quite odd. It was kind of hard to draw a meaningful conclusion outside of the fact that, once again, like the personal nature of these stimuli being evocative of personal experiences, and then the personal nature of people having their own desires for what they want from an object like this, reactions were also very, very personal. There's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, even though we designed this kind of personalization approach so that maybe if everybody gets to personalize it, they'll all kind of arrive at a kind of somewhat average level of benefit. This was not the case, but we did still get people who did find it beneficial and people who did not. And we did still get to explore, I think, what was one of the best contributions, this kind of new kind of vibrotactile stimuli. And I think there's a lot of ways that you can go with these emotionally resonant stimuli beyond this. But it was really helpful to have this kind of scope, this use case, to help us kind of explore these stimuli for one particular kind of user. So kind of wrapping up kind of what we kind of found from the project. So the emotionally resonant stimuli they're better performance for generating varied emotional responses than other single actuator vibration options. There actually was a really interesting paper from SIFI recently that explored with rhythm that might do about as good a job. It's really hard to tell because you can't really compare emotional responses rated from different people across the globe. But it also looks promising. But it still doesn't seem as effective as full-on multi-actuator setups or CT afferent setups. These are setups that like stroke your arm and like stroke the kind of the pleasant touch afferents that you're built in and hardwired to have, so that when, you know, another person socially touches you, you feel nice. It can't emulate these, but it does a pretty good job for single actuator vibrations if people find them emotionally resonant. The big advantage, yeah, is the practical flexibility. And because you're just playing vibrations that are just sound generations, you can build a library of kind of suitable stimuli and then let people personalize, choose themselves. Think of it as like an MP3 library of different pleasant experiences they can have. And that's really, really nice. And it's a nice kind of difference from a lot of prior approach of kind of testing single actuator effective haptic research that really try to look for broad trends across all across users by just switching a couple of different parameters. It can also augment really different objects really easily. We found that really well in our work. People could just slap together prototypes, stick the actuator in, and they just worked. It was really, really nice. But you need to be discreet for social use to avoid stigma. And then there are many other ways we could apply them. So already in things like the PS5 DualSense controller, we kind of see this kind of stuff used. It's not used all that widely, but in Demon Souls, for example, if you walk near to like a flaming brazier, you will get a little bit of, it's essentially exactly the same as what we did. I'm pretty sure they took the bass notes of fire and just played it through the actuator. That's what it feels like to me from my examination. And you also see this a lot from playing games like Astro's Playroom and the other two games that have bothered to put any effort into their immersive haptics this generation, where they've taken things where they've either emulated or converted sound recordings of real world phenomena, and they've started to play them through the actuators there. So there's definitely more to explore here. You could also explore taking this kind of comfort object approach and just stretching it out more long term. Obviously, we had these vibration prototypes that people built, which were nice. But then for our final study, unfortunately, we ended up with a smaller selection, and that's just basically practicality concerns. We didn't have a good system, but if I think back to that study with Sim and Ferrario, where they had that modular set of components to build these nice kind of pleasant life logging wristbands, something like that, where you have a really robust set of components that can build a wide variety of comfort objects, could be really, really good for exploring longer term adoption of really personal objects where each one is super different to each person, and then using them in actual longer term in vivo social exposure, not in a small lab trial where the effects you might expect to see between groups over 3 minutes are a little bit limited. Like there's only so much you can really expect from that. So there's definitely more to explore. And then kind of the more general takeaways that we had from the work. So we started out in the work really kind of replicating the kind of quantitative effective modeling of people's emotional responses to these vibrations. You know, the Russell's complex model of emotion, the valence arousal graph, placing things around. And this was useful, but especially when we're dealing with these evocative vibrations interfaces where they're personal to each person, trying to find these averages was just not really very helpful. There's too much expected variance in what people experience. And so we really moved on to more of a qualitative approach. There is no objective way to really measure how someone feels. There is emotion recognition methods that exists, you know, like the speech, face, body language can help delineate affective states. Or delineate kind of up along the arousal or valence scales. But to actually understand how somebody thinks they felt at the very least to something they felt, you have to ask them. There's no other real way of doing it. You can't just measure, or you can't expect to get it just from numbers. And I think the big thing that we did is as we went on, we shifted a lot from a quantitative approach to a user participatory qualitative approach. And that's where the work really became alive, became richer and more understanding and more interesting as well. And we that was probably the biggest kind of step that we took. And it's a bit disappointing, I think, as a person who now gets asked to review a lot of these papers, because there's only like 15 people in this topic really that seem to exist, around 20, 15 to 20. So I review a lot of papers on this. People still don't really use mixed methods or qualitative analysis much to explore how or why people feel certain ways about stimuli. And at the end of the day, when you're playing people these different, even abstract cues, if you don't really understand what they're feeling or why what they think they're feeling, there's only so much you can get from them indicating abstract numbers on a sheet in terms of trying to put together how, that's what I'm trying to say. It would be nice to have a better understanding of how people are feeling and crafting those experiences based on how people are feeling, not just the numbers that they give. And I think that a lot more stuff needs to try to take these participatory or qualitative approaches to really understand that modeling can do without you also kind of adding that as a bit of cooperatory data. And finally, it was really helpful for this project to have the scope of our application really, really early on, because it let us kind of design this new vibration category around the niche and then explore it with people's needs in mind. It helps to, you could really do, as I said before, a lot of different things with these vibrations, and it helps to have one set of users, one set of problems to explore. And there's all those other possibilities are still open, but it was really helpful for this project. And it really helps these end users to inform the way the project went, inform how we developed it, and inform how we assessed it. And I think that's basically everything, to be honest. I think over here is just, oh yeah, we have this slide. So I'll talk a little about what I'm doing now, because I may as well. So kind of following on from this idea of kind of exploring emotional responses in people, this is now what I've been working on. Hopefully this will get published at some point this year, but we'll have to see. Will this work? Codec unavailable. Well, they worked at home, you know. I played them on my laptop at home, but I guess playing them on here has killed them. This is basically me exploring the emotional responses to a robot in virtual reality. And it's once again me kind of tinkering around with very qualitative and participatory research design with users. So bringing users in, asking them to try out different emotional cues that a robot can produce, and really getting a strong qualitative feedback about why they like certain things better or worse, what it reminds them of, what it evokes in them, and then using that to try and design robot effective design and robot effective display a little bit better. Running out of water. And I think that is actually basically it now, because this just rumbles on to give you the credits. So thanks so much for this, listening to this kind of disjointed half and half talk. Sorry for the disjointed information, but hopefully it was still interesting and still kind of got most of the message across. And if there's anyone like asking any questions or just chat about it, then feel free. There is a slide at the end here. There it is, which has all that stuff on. So you can ask me about that. I don't really know if I'm going to be working here in 2 weeks. So, maybe, visit, if this email stops working in 2 weeks, visit the website and then there'll be a different email on there. But hopefully I still will be here in 2 weeks. It's kind of up in the air. But yeah, thanks very much for listening, and thanks.
Okay. I think we have a few minutes for questions, right?
Yes.
Both stereotypes and consider other modalities and tactics for this feedback.